The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest room Tejo had ever stood in. It stretched upward like the inside of a mountain, with seats carved into the walls in wide circles, one ring above the other. Each ring belonged to a different species. Some seats were filled with creatures that looked like trees made of glass. Others held beings that moved like liquid silver. There were insects the size of cars, and floating jellyfish that hummed when they spoke. And then, near the bottom, in a small section that still smelled like fresh metal, because it had only been installed 11 years ago, sat the humans. Tejo adjusted his collar and looked across the chamber. His advisor, Yuna, sat one seat behind him. She was already reading something on her datapad, her eyes moving fast. She never wasted a second. That was why he had chosen her. "They're staring again," Tejo said quietly. "They always stare," Yuna replied, without looking up. "We're the youngest species here. To them, we're children who somehow got a seat at the grown-up table." Tejo didn't argue. She was right. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council only 11 years ago, after their ships had finally reached far enough into deep space to make contact. Since then, the other species had treated them with a kind of polite curiosity, the way someone might watch a dog learn to open a door. Impressive, but not threatening. The council session began the way it always did. Elder Molith, the Drenari chair, uncoiled his long centipede-like body from his platform and clicked his many legs against the stone floor. The sound echoed through the chamber like a drum roll. Molith was old, very old. His shell had gone pale with age, and his voice carried the slow weight of someone who had seen too many arguments and too many wars. He believed in one thing above all else: compromise. "We shall begin," Molith announced. "First matter: the trade routes near the Polari Nebula." Tejo sat through 2 hours of debates about shipping lanes, mineral tariffs, and something involving a fungal species that wanted permission to grow on a moon that technically belonged to someone else. It was dull. Galactic politics usually was. Then the alarm came. It cut through the chamber like a blade, a deep, vibrating tone that made every species fall silent at once. The central display, a massive holographic sphere floating above the chamber floor, flickered and then filled with red. "Priority distress signal," Molith said, his many legs clicking nervously. "Source, Colony World, Luma 4. Tejo sat up straight. Luma 4 was a border colony, a mixed settlement shared by 5 species, including humans. About 60,000 people lived there, mostly farmers and miners. It was quiet. The kind of place families moved to when they wanted open skies and simple work. The holographic display changed. Sensor data streamed in. Then the images came. Tejo watched as the surface of Luma 4 appeared on the screen. Or what was left of it. Entire districts had been flattened. Fires burned in wide lines where streets used to be. The colony's central dome, which had housed schools and hospitals and a small park with a pond, was gone. Just a crater now, still glowing with heat. The data scrolled beneath the images. Over 40,000 confirmed dead. 6,000 of them were human. The chamber erupted. Ambassadors shouted over each other. Some demanded answers, others demanded silence. Molith struck the floor with his legs, calling for order. Then the Vekarai representative spoke. He was a tall reptilian creature, with dark green scales and eyes like hot coals. He stood calmly in his section, hands folded behind his back, and addressed the chamber with the ease of someone discussing the weather. The Vekari Dominion carried out a territorial correction on a disputed border world, he said. We acknowledge the loss of life and are prepared to enter negotiations regarding fair compensation. That was it. That was all he said. 40,000 dead, and he called it a correction. Tejo stared at the Vekari representative. He didn't blink. He didn't move. Around him, the chamber descended into the usual pattern. Molith urged calm. The senior species nodded along. The Draenei proposed formal arbitration, a process that would take months and end with the Vekari paying some fine and promising not to do it again. A promise they had broken 14 times before. This had happened before. Everyone in the room knew it. The Vekari attacked. The Vekari paid a small price and then waited a few years and attacked again. It was a cycle, and the galaxy had accepted it because the alternative was war, and war was worse. That was the logic. That was always the logic. Tejo looked at Yuna. She was already holding the datapad toward him. On the screen were the confirmed names of the human dead. 6,000 names. He scrolled slowly. He saw family names. He saw ages. He saw children listed beside their parents. He set the datapad down gently. "How is the human delegation voting on the arbitration proposal?" Molith asked, turning his old eyes toward Tejo. "Abstain," Tejo said. The chamber went quiet for a moment. Abstaining was unusual. Species either voted yes to show support for peace, or no to show disagreement. Nobody abstained. Or it meant something no one could quite read. Molith studied Tejo for a long moment, then moved on. The session ended an hour later, with the council drafting a formal protest against the Vekari Dominion. Strong words, firm language, no teeth. Just like the last 14 times. Tejo stood and walked toward the exit. Yuna fell into step beside him. "The arbitration will take months," she said. "They'll drag it out. They always do." Tejo didn't respond to that. He walked in silence through the long corridor that led to the human diplomatic wing. The walls here were plain and white. No decorations. Humans hadn't been around long enough to accumulate the kind of history that filled the halls of older species. When they reached his office, Tejo stopped at the door. "Get me Admiral Doltwan," he said. "Secure channel. No record." Yuna looked at him. She didn't ask why. She had seen the same names on the datapad. She had seen the crater where the school used to be. "Yes, sir," she said, and went to make the call. Tejo stepped into his office and closed the door behind him. He sat down at his desk. He placed his hands flat on the surface, and for a long time, he sat very still in the quiet room, thinking about 6,000 names and a galaxy that had learned to put a price on them. Outside, the council congratulated itself on another successful session of diplomacy. 48 hours after the massacre on Luma 4, the Vekari Dominion sent an envoy to the human diplomatic station. His name was Tekaris, and he arrived in a polished shuttle with golden markings on its hull, dressed in ceremonial robes that sparkled under the station lights. He brought gifts, fine metals from Vekari mines, a bottle of rare nectar that was considered a great honor among his people. He brought them the way a man might bring flowers after breaking a window, casually, as if the gesture itself was enough. Tekaris had done this before, many times. After every Vekari attack, he was the one sent to sit across the table from the grieving species and work out the price. How many minerals for each life lost? How many trade concessions for each city destroyed? He was good at it. He knew how to smile with his sharp teeth and make it seem warm. He knew how to say terrible things in a gentle voice. He was, by all accounts, the best negotiator the Vekari had. He expected this meeting to be simple. The humans were young, emotional. They would be angry, yes, but anger always burned out at the table. Every species was the same in the end. They shouted and they wept, and then they accepted the deal because the alternative was fighting the Vekari, and nobody wanted that. Tejo met him in a small white room with no windows, just a table, 2 chairs, and a glass of water. Yuna stood near the door, her arms folded, watching. Tekaris sat down and spread his clawed hands wide in a gesture of openness. "Ambassador Tejo," he said, "on behalf of the Vekari Dominion, I extend our regret for the events on Luma 4. We understand the loss was significant." Teho sat across from him. He said nothing. Takaris continued. He was smooth. He offered mineral rights on 3 Vakari border moons. He offered a formal public apology from the Dominion's Council. He offered a small territorial adjustment, giving the humans a mining sector they had been interested in for years. He offered education funds for the families of the dead. He laid each offer on the table like a card in a game he had played 100 times. When he was finished, he leaned back and waited. This was the part where the other side would counteroffer, ask for more, haggle. It was a ritual, and he knew every step of it. Teho looked at him for a long time. Then he spoke. "We don't bargain with murderers." The room went very still. Takaris blinked. His inner eyelids flicked sideways, the Vakari equivalent of confusion. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "Could you repeat that?" "You heard me," Teho said. "We don't bargain with murderers. There are no terms. There is no deal. We want nothing from you." Takaris stared at him. For the first time in his long career, he didn't know what to say. His mouth opened slightly, showing rows of small, sharp teeth, and then closed again. He looked at Yuna near the door. She looked back at him with no expression at all. "Ambassador," Takaris said slowly, "perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. I am authorized to offer very generous." "There is no misunderstanding," Teho said. He stood up. "Thank you for coming. Yuna will escort you to your shuttle." He walked out of the room. Takaris sat alone at the table for a full minute before Yuna stepped forward and gestured politely toward the door. He left in silence, carrying his gifts back to his shuttle. For the first time, the bottle of rare nectar felt heavy in his hands. Far away from the diplomatic station, in the cold dark of deep space, Admiral Dohwan stood on the bridge of the human warship Indomitable. It was a big ship, long and heavy, built not for beauty, but for purpose. Around it, 46 other warships held formation in perfect silence. The Third Expeditionary Fleet, humanity's sharpest blade. Dohwan was a tall man, with gray hair cut short, and a face that looked like it had been carved from old wood. He didn't talk much. He never had. His crew respected him not because he gave great speeches, but because every order he gave was precise, and every plan he made worked. On the lower decks, a young officer named Jisoo was checking her station for the 3rd time. She was assigned to tactical operations, which meant she helped coordinate the fleet's weapons during battle. She was 26 years old and had never been in a real fight. Training, yes. Simulations, hundreds of them, but never the real thing. Her hands were steady, but her stomach was not. "You good?" asked the officer beside her, a man named Hanul, who ran electronic warfare systems. He had dark circles under his eyes, and a cup of cold coffee that he kept forgetting to drink. It was mostly true. Hanul nodded. "We'll be at Korath in 6 hours, the Vekhari military staging world. That's where the fleet that hit Luma 4 launched from." He paused. "We're not going there to talk." Jisoo knew that. Everyone on the ship knew that. The briefing had been short and clear. Admiral Dohwan had stood at the front of the room and said exactly what they were going to do. No blockade, no occupation, no siege. They were going to Korath to find the Vekhari fleet that had killed 40,000 civilians, and they were going to destroy it. Someone had asked what would happen if the Vekhari tried to surrender. Dohwan had said, "We will accept surrender from crews who lay down arms. We will not leave their military infrastructure standing." That was it. No long explanation, no rally, just the job and the reason. Back on the diplomatic station, Yuna found Teho in his office. He was standing by the wall, looking at a screen that showed a map of the galaxy. A small red dot marked the Korath system. A blue cluster of dots was moving toward it. "The Council knows," Yuna said. "Molith has sent 12 messages in the last hour. He's begging us to stop. The Polari ambassador called it reckless." The Draenari are threatening sanctions. Let them talk, Teho said. Molith asked what we want, what our demands are. Teho turned to look at her. Respond with one line. Yuna waited. Humanity does not negotiate the price of its dead, she typed out and sent it. Within minutes, it was being read by every ambassador in the council. Within an hour, it was being discussed on news channels across 3 galactic sectors. Most species thought the humans were bluffing. This was posturing, they said, a dramatic gesture to get better terms at the table. The humans would calm down. They always did. That was how the galaxy worked. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Dohan watched the Korath system grow larger on his display. He had read the names of the dead, too. All 6,000. He had read them alone in his quarters the night before, sitting on the edge of his bed with his reading glasses on, scrolling through name after name after name. He had found a girl who shared his granddaughter's name. She had been 9 years old. Dohan took off his glasses, set the datapad down, and went to the bridge. The fleet moved forward. The stars didn't care. They never did. But the men and women on those ships cared, and that was enough. In his shuttle, flying back to Vekari space, Tekaris contacted Warlord Gorvan on a private channel. They refused all terms, Tekaris reported. Gorvan's scaled face twisted into something like amusement. They are bluffing, he said. Young species always bluff. They will come to the table when they realize what our fleet can do. Tekaris said nothing. But for the first time in his career, sitting in his golden shuttle with his rejected gifts, he wasn't sure the warlord was right. The Korath system had 2 suns, one white and one pale orange, and between them hung a world covered in gray rock and black metal. Korath was not a place where people lived. It was a place where the Vekari built their war machines. Shipyards stretched across the surface like scars. Orbital stations circled the planet in rings, bristling with weapons and docking bays. 300 warships sat in formation around the planet, their hulls gleaming under the light of the twin suns. Warlord Gorvan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Burning Fang, and watched the stars with the calm satisfaction of a predator in his own territory. He had been told the humans were coming. He was not worried. Other species had sent fleets before, small shows of force that turned around the moment they saw the size of the Vekari armada. The galaxy had learned long ago that fighting the Vekari directly was a fool's game. You didn't need to win every battle if everyone believed you would. Then the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. 47 ships. That was all. The Vekari had 300. Gorvan's tactical officer reported the numbers and actually laughed. They brought a patrol group, he said, against Korath. Gorvan didn't laugh. He had heard the reports from Tekaris. Something about the humans had made even his best negotiator nervous, and Tekaris was not a creature that got nervous easily. Still, numbers were numbers. 47 against 300. This would be short. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Dowan looked at the Vekari formation on his display and said nothing for exactly 10 seconds. Then he turned to his communications officer. Open a channel. Broadcast on all frequencies. Dowan's voice carried across the void between the fleets, heard by every Vekari ship, every orbital station, and every listening post in the system. This is Admiral Dowan of the Human Third Expeditionary Fleet. You are harboring the fleet that murdered 40,000 civilians on Luma 4. You have 90 minutes to evacuate all non-combatants from your orbital stations. After that, we are coming through. The channel closed. On the Burning Fang, Gorvan heard the message and tilted his head. 90 minutes. The human was giving them 90 minutes. As if the Vekari needed time to prepare. As if they would run. They are posturing, Gorvan said. Hold position. Let them come. He did not order an evacuation of non-combatants. There was no point. The humans would see the size of his fleet and turn around. They always did. Below decks on the Indomitable, Jisoo sat at her tactical station and watched the clock count down. Around her, the crew was quiet. Not the nervous silence of people who were afraid, but the focused silence of people who had a job to do and were getting ready to do it. She checked her targeting systems one more time. Everything was green. In the electronic warfare bay, 2 floors below, Hanol and his team were already working. Their fingers moved across their screens like musicians tuning instruments before a performance. The Vakari defense grid was powerful, a massive network of sensor arrays and automated weapon platforms that covered the planet and its orbital space like a net. Breaking it was supposed to be impossible. Hanul had spent 3 days studying its design, and he had found a way in. 60 seconds until the grid comes down, Hanul reported over the internal channel. His voice was flat and steady. On my mark. The 90 minutes passed. The Vakari did not evacuate. Begin. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for the next 100 years. Hanul's team struck first. They launched a coordinated electronic attack on the Vakari sensor grid. Thousands of false signals flooding the network simultaneously, while targeted code cut into the grid's communication relays. For exactly 11 seconds, every Vakari sensor in the system went blind. 11 seconds doesn't sound like much. It was enough. In those 11 seconds, the human fleet moved. Not in a broad formation like most galactic navies used, spreading out to show their strength. The humans collapsed inward, forming a tight spear aimed directly at the heart of the Vakari formation. They hit the gap between 2 orbital stations at full speed, and by the time the Vakari sensors came back online, the human fleet was already inside their defensive perimeter. The Vakari scrambled. Ships broke formation, trying to turn inward. Orbital guns swiveled to find targets that were suddenly too close for their long-range systems. Commanders shouted orders over each other. It was chaos. The humans did not shout. They did not break formation. They fought like a machine. Jisoo's hands moved across her console, feeding targeting data to the fleet's weapon systems. She could see the Vakari ships on her screen, dozens of them, turning and firing in every direction. She tagged each target with a calm precision that she didn't fully understand. Her training had taken over, her body doing what her mind had practiced 1,000 times in simulation. The difference was that now, when a red dot disappeared from her screen, it meant a real ship had died. She tried not to think about that. She failed. The battle was not elegant. It was fast and violent and loud. Human kinetic rounds punched through Vakari hulls. Vakari energy weapons scorched the armor of human ships. Explosions bloomed in the darkness like terrible flowers. But through it all, the human fleet held its shape, moving as one body, striking and pulling back and striking again with a rhythm that the Vakari could not match. Gorvan watched from the bridge of the Burning Fang as his fleet fell apart around him. He had expected the humans to fight the way other species fought, with broad formations and cautious exchanges. Instead, they fought like wolves, fast, close, ruthless. They targeted his command ships first, cutting the head off his fleet before the body could respond. All ships, concentrate fire on the lead vessel, Gorvan roared. But the Indomitable was already gone, slipping behind the wreckage of a destroyed orbital station and reappearing on his flank. A volley of kinetic rounds struck the Burning Fang's engines. The ship shuddered. Alarms screamed. The lights flickered and turned red. 3 hours and 47 minutes after the battle began, it was over. The Vakari fleet was broken. 112 ships destroyed. Another 90 disabled. The rest had scattered to the edges of the system, too damaged or too afraid to keep fighting. The orbital stations were dark, their weapon systems slag, their docking bays open to the vacuum. Korath's military infrastructure, built over decades, was gone. Gorvan's flagship drifted in the wreckage, powerless. He sent a surrender signal. His voice, when it came over the channel, was not arrogant anymore. It was quiet. Admiral Dohan accepted the surrender. He ordered rescue teams to collect surviving Vekari crews from damaged ships. He did not fire on vessels that had stopped fighting. He did not chase the ones that ran. He was not interested in killing for its own sake. He had come to Korath for one reason: to destroy the military machine that had killed the people of Luma 4. And that machine was now in pieces, floating in the dark between two suns. Jisoo leaned back from her console when the order to stand down came. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them and could not make them stop. Beside her, another officer was crying silently, tears running down his face while he stared at his screen. Across the bridge, someone was praying under their breath. They had won. It didn't feel like winning. In the Galactic Council chamber, the sensor feeds from Korath played on the central display. Every ambassador, every delegate, every aide watched in silence as the most powerful military staging ground in Vekari space burned. Elder Moloch's many legs had stopped clicking. He stood completely still, which for a Draenari was a sign of deep shock. Around him, ambassadors from a dozen species stared at the display with expressions that ranged from horror to something that, if you looked closely enough, might have been hope. Nobody said a word for a very long time. The humans had not bluffed. The galaxy was beginning to understand that. The council chamber was louder than Teho had ever heard it. Every species was talking at once. Some were shouting. The Draenari delegates clicked their legs against the floor in sharp, angry rhythms. The Pelari ambassador, a tall being made of crystalline plates, was vibrating so hard that pieces of light scattered off her body like broken glass. Even the Marathi, a species known for being so calm that other races used them as a standard for patience, were standing and waving their long arms. Teho walked into this storm with his hands in his pockets. Yuna walked beside him, her datapad held against her chest. She had not slept in 2 days. Neither had Teho, but you couldn't tell by looking at him. He moved through the chaos of the chamber floor the way a stone sits in a river, still, while everything else rushes past. Elder Mullith struck the floor with his forelegs so hard that chips of stone flew up from the surface. The chamber slowly fell quiet, though the silence was the kind that buzzes, full of unsaid things. The human delegation, Mullith said, and his voice was cold, in a way Teho had never heard before, has committed an act of unprovoked military aggression against a sovereign member of this council. The destruction of Korath's military infrastructure represents a violation of 17 galactic accords. I call upon this chamber to impose immediate sanctions on the human species, and to demand the surrender of their fleet commander for tribunal. Teho listened. He didn't react. He waited. The Polari ambassador spoke next. What the humans have done is no different from what the Vekari did on Luma 4. Violence met with violence. This council exists to break that cycle, not to feed it. Several species murmured in agreement. Then the Raithani ambassador, a small furry creature with 6 eyes, who represented one of the galaxy's oldest trade civilizations, raised a hand. With respect, the Vekari killed 40,000 civilians. The humans destroyed a military target and accepted the surrender of enemy combatants. These are not the same thing. The murmuring shifted. Some voices agreed, others didn't. Mullith turned his pale old eyes toward the human section. Ambassador Teho, you will address this chamber. Teho stood and walked to the central podium. It was a raised platform in the middle of the chamber floor, designed so that whoever stood on it could be seen and heard by every seat in the vast room. He stepped up onto it, and looked around at the hundreds of alien faces staring down at him. He didn't raise his voice. The chamber's systems carried every word to every ear. "I have a list," he said. "I'd like to read some of it, if the chamber will allow me." Moleth waved a leg impatiently. "Proceed." Taeho pulled out his datapad. Minjae, age 7. Unji, age 4. Siwoo, age 11. Haeyun, age 6. These are the names of human children who died on Luma 4. There are more. Many more. I will not read all of them, because we would be here for hours, and I know this chamber has more important things to discuss. Nobody moved. In the last 112 years, Taeho continued, setting the datapad down, the Vekari Dominion has attacked 14 colonies belonging to 9 different species. After each attack, this council opened negotiations. After each negotiation, the Vekari paid a fine. After each fine, they waited a few years and attacked again. He looked around the room. 14 attacks, 14 negotiations, over 200,000 dead. And each time, this council sat in these beautiful chairs and called it diplomacy. The silence was so thick it felt like a physical thing. "You taught them," Taeho said quietly, "that murder has a price tag. We taught them that it doesn't." The Polari ambassador's crystal plates stopped vibrating. The Drenari stopped clicking. Even Moleth went still. "Humanity will not sit at a table where the lives of our people are treated as a line item in a trade agreement," Taeho said. "We will not haggle over the bones of our children. We will not accept minerals and apologies in exchange for cities full of dead. If that makes us barbaric in the eyes of this council, then I suggest the council update its definition of barbaric. Because from where I stand, the truly barbaric thing is a galaxy that watched the Vekari kill for 100 years and called it peace." He stepped down from the podium and walked back to his seat. He didn't look at anyone. He sat down. Yuna handed him a glass of water. He drank it. For almost a full minute, nobody spoke. Then the noise returned, louder than before. Half the chamber was furious. The other half was something else, something harder to name. The Rithani ambassador was nodding slowly. The small, quiet delegate from the Fenori, a species that had lost 2 colonies to the Vekari, and never received more than a written apology, was wiping moisture from her eyes. 3 other minor species were exchanging looks across the chamber, the kind of looks that carry words without sound. Moleth called for a vote on sanctions against humanity. The process took 2 hours. When it was done, the motion had failed. 12 species voted against it. 5 of those 12 had never voted against a Drenari motion in the entire history of the council. Moleth stared at the results for a long time. Then he adjourned the session without a word. That evening, Yuna found Taeho in his office. She had her datapad open and was scrolling through messages faster than Taeho could read. 6 species have sent private communications to our delegation in the last 4 hours, she said. The Fenori, the Rithani, the Golas, the Pelori miners, the Duni, and the Treth. She looked up. None of them are angry, Taeho. They're asking to meet. What do they want? They want to know if we meant what we said. They want to know if we'll stand behind it. Some of them have been victims of the Vekari for decades. They've been waiting for someone to say what you said today. Taeho closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were tired but steady. Set the meetings. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, a human journalist named Sujin was aboard a civilian ship that had been following the Third Fleet at a safe distance. She had recorded everything. The battle at Korath, the rescue operations where human crews pulled Vekari survivors from wrecked ships. And she had recorded Taeho's speech, broadcast live from the council chamber. She packaged it all together and transmitted it across every galactic news network she could reach. Within hours, it was everywhere. On stations and colonies and homeworlds, across 1,000 systems, beings of every shape and size watched a human man stand on a podium and refuse to put a price on the dead. They watched a human fleet destroy a military empire in 4 hours, and they watched human soldiers pull their enemies from burning wreckage and carry them to safety. The reactions were mixed. Some species called it terrifying, some called it reckless. But on dozens of small, quiet worlds that had lost people to the Vakari and been told to accept it, people watched Sujin's broadcast and felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. It was the feeling that maybe things didn't have to be this way, that maybe someone, somewhere, was willing to say no. On the Indomitable, Admiral Dowan watched the broadcast alone in his quarters. When it was over, he turned off the screen and sat in the dark for a while. Then he took out the datapad with the names of the dead and read them again, one by one, the way a person reads prayers, not because the words will change anything, but because the people they belonged to deserved to be remembered. 6 months passed, and the galaxy was not the same. The Vakari Dominion had changed from the inside. It happened the way a wall crumbles, slowly at first, with small cracks no one notices, and then, all at once. Warlord Gorvan, who had ruled the Dominion for 30 years through fear and teeth, was removed by his own generals 2 months after Korath. They didn't kill him. That would have been the old way. Instead, they put him in a room and told him he was retired, and they locked the door. He spent his days staring at the wall and wondering how 47 ships had broken everything he had built. A new leader rose in his place, a younger Vakari named Oreth, who had scales the color of river stones and eyes that moved carefully before his mouth did. He was not soft. No Vakari leader could afford to be. But he was smart enough to look at the ruins of Korath and understand something that Gorvan never had. The galaxy had changed, and the Vakari could change with it, or be left behind. Oreth sent a delegate to the Galactic Council. Not a warrior, not a negotiator, a diplomat, young and quiet, who sat in the Vakari section and listened more than he spoke. The other species didn't know what to make of him. The Vakari had never sent someone who listened. One evening, the Vakari delegate approached Tejo in the corridor outside the council chamber. He was nervous. His claws clicked against the stone floor, a sound that reminded Tejo of Malith, though the rhythm was younger and less certain. "Ambassador Tejo," the delegate said, "my name is Reckon. I have been sent by Director Oreth to discuss the possibility of a formal peace between our peoples." Tejo looked at him. The young Vakari was shorter than Gorvan had been, and his eyes didn't have the same burning arrogance. There was something almost careful in the way he held himself, like a person walking through a room full of broken glass. "You want peace," Tejo said. "Yes. That stop killing people. That's step 1. Reckon waited. And step 2? There is no step 2 until step 1 is real. Reckon looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I understand," he said, and he walked away, not offended, not angry, just carrying the weight of what had been said and knowing that it was fair. Across the galaxy, things were moving. 12 species, most of them small, most of them quiet, most of them the kind of people that larger civilizations stepped on without looking down, had come together to sign the Luma Accord. It was a defensive coalition, a promise that an attack on one was an attack on all, and it was built openly and deliberately on the model of human military cooperation. Yuna had been promoted to lead the new Human Galactic Intelligence Bureau, a position that didn't officially exist, but that everyone in the council knew about anyway. She spent her days in a small office filled with screens, tracking the movements of fleets and the whispers of diplomats, making sure that no one was surprised again. She was good at it. She had always been good at seeing things before they arrived. One afternoon, Elder Malith requested a private meeting with Tejo. They met in a small garden on the diplomatic station, a room with real plants and soft light, and the sound of water, running over stones. Molith uncoiled his long body along a bench and rested his many legs while Teho sat across from him on a simple chair. "I have been chair of this council for 41 years, Molith said. His voice was slow, and it carried the kind of tiredness that comes not from the body, but from the mind. In that time I have brokered 219 peace agreements. I have prevented 6 wars. I have negotiated the release of hostages, the return of territories, and the end of blockades. I have given my life to the idea that compromise is the highest calling of a civilized society." Teho listened. "And now," Molith continued, "I find myself wondering if I was wrong." He paused. His old eyes studied Teho with something that wasn't anger anymore. It was something sadder than that. "The system I built, the system of negotiation and patience and measured response, it kept the peace. But it also allowed the Vekari to kill with impunity for a century. I told myself that the cost was acceptable because the alternative was worse. War, chaos, the collapse of order." He made a sound like a sigh, though Drenari didn't breathe the same way humans did. "Do you truly believe violence solved this?" Teho thought about that. He didn't rush his answer. The water trickled over the stones, and the plants moved gently in the recycled air. "No," he said finally. "Violence didn't solve it. But silence in the face of slaughter was not solving it either. You built a system that worked for most of the galaxy most of the time. But for the people on Luma 4, and for every colony the Vekari burned before that, the system didn't work. It just told them that their lives were worth less than stability." He met Molith's eyes. "We couldn't accept that. Not because we love war. We don't. We accept it because when someone kills our people and offers to pay for it, the only answer we know how to give is no." Molith was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded, once, a slow dip of his ancient head. "Perhaps," he said, "the galaxy needs both, the ones who negotiate and the ones who refuse." Far from the diplomatic stations and the council chambers and the offices where people like Yuna watch their screens, Jisoo stood on the surface of Luma 4. The colony had been partly rebuilt. New structures stood where the old ones had been. The central dome was smaller than before, but it was there, white and clean against the blue sky. A park had been planted inside it, with young trees and a small pond. Children were already playing there. Jisoo could hear their laughter from where she stood, and it made her chest tight in a way she didn't fully understand. They had given her a medal too, a small silver thing shaped like a star. She kept it in a drawer and didn't look at it. In front of her was the memorial wall. It was long and white and covered in names. 40,000 and some names, carved into the stone in letters so small you had to get close to read them. She found the section with the human names and ran her fingers over them. Minjae, age 7. Unji, age 4. Siwoo, age 11. Haeyun, age 6. Name after name after name. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had done a terrible thing for the right reason, and who would carry that weight for the rest of her life. She was okay with that. The weight meant it mattered. If it ever stopped being heavy, that would be the day to worry. Admiral Dowan had retired quietly. No ceremony, no speeches. He had simply filed his papers, packed his things, and gone home to a small house on a colony world where the sky was orange in the evening. His granddaughter visited on weekends. He was teaching her to grow vegetables. Back in the council chamber, a new session was underway. A minor territorial dispute had come up between two species, the Golas and the Treth. It was a small thing, a disagreement over mining rights on an unclaimed asteroid belt. But the Golas delegate, in the heat of the argument, leaned forward and said something that carried just enough threat to make the room go quiet. "Perhaps we should consider all options in resolving this matter," the Golas delegate said. And everyone in the room understood what all options meant. The Treth ambassador looked at the Golas delegate. Then, very slowly, she turned her head and glanced across the chamber at the human section, where Tejo sat in his usual seat, his hands folded, his expression calm. She turned back to the Golas delegate and said, in a clear and measured voice, "Perhaps we should resolve this peacefully, while that is still our choice." The Golas delegate paused. He looked at the human section too. Tejo hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't done anything at all. He was just sitting there, a quiet man from a young species, watching. The Golas delegate cleared his throat. "Yes," he said, "perhaps we should." The dispute was settled in 40 minutes. No threats, no compensation demands, just two species talking like adults, because, for the first time in a long time, the galaxy had remembered that actions have consequences, and that somewhere in the chamber there were people who believed that. Tejo walked out of the session with Yuna at his side. The corridor was quiet. The light was soft. "Good session," Yuna said. "It was," Tejo agreed. They walked in silence for a while. Then Yuna spoke again. "Do you think it'll last? The peace?" He thought about Malif's tired eyes, and Rekken's careful steps, and Jisu's shaking hands, and Dowan's granddaughter learning to grow vegetables. He thought about the names on the wall, and the laughter of children in a rebuilt park. "I don't know," he said, "but they'll think twice now. And sometimes, thinking twice is enough." They turned the corner, and disappeared into the long white hallway. Two humans walking through a galaxy that had finally learned a very old, very simple lesson. Some things are not for sale, and the people who understand that are the ones you should never test. The stars burned on, indifferent and eternal. But the people beneath them were a little different now, and in a galaxy that had spent centuries trading in blood, that was enough to call it progress.